good evening and welcome to our concert presentation this evening. Great to see you. When Dr. Anderson first approached me about collaboration to show the relationship between the oral and the visual as well as physical aspects of sound, I was thrilled. I thought, what a wonderful idea this is, and what an exciting educational opportunity it will be for our students, both for the music students and also for the physics students. So tonight's concert presentation is a little bit different than our traditional concert, where we're going to hear musical numbers one after another back to back. We separated the musical groups into families: strings, winds, percussion, and brass. And physics students will introduce the physics behind how sound is created, in particular in instruments, in each instrumental family. And the music students will then perform some pieces on the same instruments. So I know that Dr. Anderson has prepared a fantastic presentation for us, and let's not delay anymore and welcome Dr. Anderson on stage. Thank you.
All right, welcome. I'm glad to be able to be here tonight. We are so grateful. I want to give some specific acknowledgments to Professor Chow for being willing to collaborate with my students this semester on this team-based, or this project-based learning experience that my students have been doing. I'll say a little bit more about their project here in a minute. I also want to give a thank you to Professor O'Flynn, the chair of the music department, also for coordinating a lot of this with me, as well as Professor Jones for providing the percussion instruments this evening. And a big, big thank you to the Norda Center. As you can see, there's a projector on stage, as well as microphones and lighting that they don't usually have to do in this space, so I really want to thank them for their efforts to make this performance happen this evening. Okay, a little bit about project-based learning. I had a chance to get some training in project-based learning, and the idea is that we want students in a course to be able to be involved in a challenging project, have some be an authentic event, as well as being able to reflect on their project, get feedback on their project, and have a performance or an event at the end of their work. And so my students have been working very hard. They've been learning all semester about the principles that you're going to see tonight, and they've put together a very good show, and I want to thank my students for all of their hard work. This is their final exam, so thank you for coming and supporting my students with their project. And so the idea is that we're teaming up with somebody outside of our department, so the music department is our partner in this event to have this collaboration occur. So a little bit about some physics principles. You guys have all seen probably the pendulum over in the Pope Science Building, but a pendulum just kind of goes back and forth, right? I tell my students, you are getting smarter, right? So, and this is what happens when we hold it like this. Guess what's going to happen if I make it shorter? Any ideas? What do you think?
Faster.
Yeah, does it go faster? Very good. So yes, we could put a number on this. We could clock how long it takes to go back and forth, or we could say how many times does it do that each second, right? The there and back motion is what we call the frequency. And frequency of all of the instruments that you're going to hear tonight is related to our perception of pitch, right? So low frequencies have a low pitch, high frequencies have high pitch. That's one example. Another example of something that oscillates and has a distinct frequency would be a mass on a spring. And you notice that the rate of the oscillation depends on the physical properties of the system. So that is something that you will see tonight is the length of the instrument, the tension of the instrument, what kind of gas is being used inside the instrument. All of these things will affect the properties, which in turn affect the frequency that you will hear. And another concept to show you tonight is the idea of resonance, right? If we have an oscillating system, say for example, the mass on a pendulum going back and forth, or your child on a swing, right? Eventually it will die out, right? So in order to keep that mass going, we have to put energy into it, right? And if I do it at just the right rate, if I'm doing it at the rate of the natural oscillation of this mass on a pendulum, then it will be in what we call resonance, right? We're driving it at its natural frequency and exciting that mode. So here's another example of resonance. If you've ever blown on a bottle, you hear that it is creating a very specific pitch, and that is an idea of resonance. Here's one that's a little bit more dramatic. This one is a pipe that happens to have a metal mesh inside, and I can take a blowtorch and I can heat up the mesh until it is glowing hot inside, and then I can hold it here. Wait for it, wait for it. Is it gonna work? Guess I didn't make it quite hot enough. Let's try that again. A little hotter here. Ouch, go. There we go. So notice it's exciting a tone that would be similar to an organ pipe of the same length. So the heat is the source of the energy, and then the oscillations are built up inside this resonator, and it's exciting the mode of this pipe here. Okay, next up, we have, oh yeah, so what about oscillations? So these are oscillations, right, that occur, but how do we make it into a wave? Well, a wave is not only an oscillating system, but it's an oscillating system that propagates in space. So if I were to take this, and if I were to move it along in space, then that would be one example of a wave. You guys have all probably done the wave in a stadium and so forth, something that is propagating that disturbance in the system. Okay, next up, a little bit about sound. So sound is movement of waves through a medium, particularly air. For all the music that we're going to talk about tonight is propagation of sound through the air that we have around us. And air has pressure, right? Every time those molecules are bumping into other molecules and into us and into any surface, they're exerting a force on that, and any force over an area is a pressure. And so we have atmospheric pressure all the way around us, but you notice in this picture here that when a speaker is moving in and out, it's making those molecules scrunch closer together, and then when it moves away, then there's spaces where there's less molecules in between. So let me just grab this circuitry. So where it's scrunched together, we call those condensations. Where they're spread out, we call those rarefactions, and those are propagating. So as I speak to you tonight, the molecules from my mouth are not going all the way to your ear, but they're bumping into other air molecules, bumping into other molecules, which eventually will vibrate your eardrum. Okay, so what can we do? Well, as scientists, we want to quantify, we want to put numbers on the things that we are showing you tonight. And we are not going to get into the very mathematical and complex equations that describe these instruments, because this is Physics 1700. This is the Descriptive Acoustics class, so very basic. So, but for our audience, I think you guys would appreciate more basic explanation of these instruments as well. But one thing that we can do is we can show you a waveform. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my tablet here, and we are going to look at what happens with the pressure as a function of time. Okay, hopefully that's going to come up here in just a second. There we go. All right, so this is picking up sound from everywhere around us. By the way, if you want to download an app like this, there's lots of apps out there that you can do, and babies just love this. They go blah blah blah, and they make all kinds of sound in this space, and the microphone picks it up. But you see that there's lots of different sounds coming through because my voice is making different things. Some of them are more repeated patterns than others, but for musical instruments, what you will notice is that they will have a very distinct pattern. So the simplest pattern I can show you is a tuning fork. Notice it has one very specific pitch associated with that, and it has a nice, very sinusoidal sort of shape of a wave. Okay, so can we get our musicians to come and demonstrate a note, please? Maybe we could try a little higher pitch than what we tried earlier today, so whatever pitch you want to try. Oh, okay. Well, that's okay. What note would you guys like to try that's a little higher? We tried a concert A, but let's do something higher. Okay, let's do an E. Okay, and let's see what that sounds like on our viola. Okay, now let's try a low note. Even lower. Okay, so you can see that there's some similarities between, thank you so much, similarities between these shapes. But there's also some differences, right? So the wiggliness, the overall big wiggle is the same, but there's more wiggliness in some places than other places. And so how much that happens in this waveform is dependent on the overtones that are present in the instrument, how much those overtones and how much they change and so forth. And so that's what we call the timbre of the sound. So how can we do that? Well, or how can we visualize that? Well, we can also look at the pitch as a function, or the amplitude of these modes as a function of the frequency, which my students will get into more later, but I will show you in just a second here as well. Okay, so let me just show you this one really quick since I'm talking about it. So we have here a graph that is going to show us the amplitude or the loudness of the sound as a function of frequency. And I did these on my piano, so one of them is doing a C with a fifth above that, which is a G, and you can see that some of the peaks are lining up with each other, and that's a very consonant sound. And then the other one here is a C played with a C sharp, and you notice that the peaks of the overtones don't align, and so we would say that that's a more dissonant sound for that one. So this is something that we'll talk about later on. But in order to appreciate sound, I also wanted to mention a little bit about our wonderful hearing mechanism. So the human ear is fabulous. We can hear many, many ranges of frequencies, from 20 hertz up to about 20,000 hertz, as well as we can hear many levels of sound, from very, very quiet levels up to 12 orders of magnitude for the loudest sounds that we can hear. And so we have our ear. This is a schematic of our ear over here. And we have our ear canal, which leads to our eardrum right here, which wiggles back and forth when we hear sounds. And then it moves these little bones, which in turn wiggle part of this inner part of our ear, which is known as the cochlea. The cochlea looks like a snail shell, and along the cochlea is this very special delicate membrane with little cells attached to that. And when our ears hear certain sounds, certain parts of the basilar membrane wiggles, and other parts of the basilar membrane don't wiggle. So basically, along the basilar membrane, the stiffness is changing such that it responds to different frequencies at different positions, which means that it can send different signals to different parts of our brain to say, hey, we're hearing a low-pitched sound, or hey, we're hearing a high-pitched sound. And so these very delicate structures wind up along there, so we're hearing the highest frequencies near our eardrum, and then the lower frequencies as we go coiling in the cochlea. And to demonstrate this effect, I have these three balls here, and I'm going to basically move this back and forth so you can see them absorbing or being excited by a certain motion. So if I want to get the longest one going, I can make it go like this, right? What would I need to do to make the other ones go? What do you think? I probably need to go faster, right? So if I go just right, if I'm doing it at the resonant frequency of that oscillator, it's going to make it excite. And then for this guy, down here, even faster, right? Yeah, so there we go. So this is what's happening with our eardrum. Our ears are absorbing different frequencies based on the material of our basilar membrane and sending those signals to our brain, which is super cool. Okay, so we talked about that one. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about another property of air. So when air is moving fast, it actually has less pressure. I know that's a little bit counterintuitive, but it's true. So if we have, say, like any kind of fluid, water or air flowing through a pipe, and we have a bigger section of the pipe on one side and a smaller section of the pipe on the other side, we can see that there's air bubbles inside. The air bubbles are squished up more on the side that is moving slower, and they're more relaxed or open up where there's less pressure on the side where it's moving quickly. And this effect will come into play when we talk about our reed instruments, our lip reed and our reed instruments, to excite the vibrations of the instruments. And so basically fast moving air between the lips or between the reed and another reed, or the reed and the mouthpiece, helps them close again. So we push the air through, and then that helps it to close. And it does that many, many times a second for the note that is being played. And so to demonstrate Bernoulli's principle, I have a beach ball and a leaf blower. So I will turn off my microphone in a second because it's going to be quite loud. But what you're going to see is you're going to see that as the air blows past, so say for example the air is moving on this side of the beach ball, this is less pressure. So the atmosphere will push it into that airstream. But if it gets too far over here, now the air is moving on this side, now that's less pressure, and so the atmospheric pressure will push it back in. So basically it's going to help hold it in place, and you'll notice that I can even tilt it to a different angle and so forth. So I'm going to ask my son to come up here and help me with this one. As we talk about musical instruments, there's a simple model that we can follow, and so you can pay attention as we go through these different groups of instruments to see how they are creating sound. So basically there's some source of energy that's going to allow the motion to occur, then there's going to be something that's oscillating, something that is resonating or helping control the pitch. Maybe it's the tone holes, maybe it's the slide of the trombone, and then there's going to be something that's going to help push the sound, right? You notice that my tuning fork had this box, and if you've ever hit a tuning fork, it doesn't sound very loud until you stick it next to something that can move, right? A piano has a soundboard which helps the air to move, and that's what's generating the sound that we are going to hear. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to our string group. And again, thank you to all my students for all your hard work.
So yes, we're going to be explaining a little bit of the physics of how stringed instruments work. Now, first, especially as we're getting it ready, there's a lot we can go on to with all these instruments, and everything is so cool. Now, we only have about 10 minutes to talk about this, so obviously we can't get into a whole lot, but we're gonna do the best we can. So yeah, just physics of stringed instruments now real quick. We're gonna focus on bowed instruments. So, like the cello here, like Noah has for us. There's also like guitar, that's a stringed instrument. That one's plucked and strummed. We just don't have the time to get into the physics of that. So, I'm going to pass it off.
Yeah, so I'm going to just give a little explanation of how bowed string instruments, how the vibration is actually generated on that string, because we know that, you know, they take the bow, they pull it across the strings, but how does that actually make the strings vibrate? So it's due to a phenomenon called stick-slip motion, where the string, you can see, is sticking to the bow as the bow is continually being driven across it, and then it slips back. And this is a slow motion, high-speed camera. This happens hundreds or thousands of times in a second. But as that is continually pushed across, that creates that repetitive motion that makes the vibration of the string. And actually, this is why cellists, violinists, violists, they use rosin on the hairs of their bow, because it increases the friction, so that violin or other instrument string will actually stick longer and make the vibration larger. So yeah. Next we have William.
Alright, now we have harmonics. So when a note is played on a stringed instrument, the note you hear is the fundamental, which has a frequency, which has a wavelength of the distance from the nut to the bridge and back. This is the first mode. Now there's many other modes above the fundamental. These modes determine the timbre of the sound. So the second mode is twice the frequency of the first mode, so it's an octave higher. The third mode is 3 times the frequency, so it's an octave and a fifth higher. The fourth mode is 4 times the frequency, so it's 2 octaves higher, and so on. Now a cool thing you can do on stringed instruments is you can make a certain mode more pronounced by muting the other modes. So to make the second mode more pronounced, you lightly place your finger halfway between the bridge and the nut. Then for the third mode, you would do it a third of the way. For the fourth mode, a fourth of the way. And so on. These are called harmonics.
So when we bow on the string, the strings are too small for us to hear the sound normally. So the way that we hear the sound is through the body of the instrument, which on a violin you can see the anatomy of it basically. So through the bridge, the strings will vibrate the top and bottom plate, and that post in the middle sends the vibration through the entirety of it. And the F hole, or like the hole of an acoustic guitar, that helps the waves propagate through the air. And yeah, so the size and material of the instrument will always affect the sound.
Okay, so another important property of stringed instruments is tension and density. So as you increase the tension on a string, you're going to get a higher pitch or frequency. And as or density, you get a lower pitch, and a higher tension is a higher pitch. We're going to do a little demonstration here with a little spring, and kind of varying the tension on it and seeing how the wave is faster and slower. So we're going to start with a bit of lower tension here. So it's going to be pretty loose, and as we apply some force to the spring, we can kind of see it's a slow motion, and it kind of just lasts for quite a while. But as we increase the amount of tension in the spring, and give it some force as well, you can see it's a lot faster, a lot more frequent. And so that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes of the string instruments.
And so the last thing that our group is going to talk about is the bowing distance. This is the bowing distance from the bridge to the nut. Now, typically, we don't go all the way to the nut, and like that's weird. We'll just go to the fingerboard typically. Like, bridge to the fingerboard is pretty typical. Now, musicians don't actually use this 1 through 5 scale. I actually just learned it out today, which was kind of cool. But there's a different sound, a different timbre that goes with each of these positions. And I'm gonna have Noah demonstrate it for us. So starting from close to the fingerboard. And now we'll move to about halfway. And then closer to the bridge. Now, I'm not sure how much you noticed, it actually got louder as he got closer to the bridge. That's just how the physics of it work, because as you're putting more energy closer to the bridge pushes it into the body of the instrument, so it's just getting more energy in, which puts more out. But it doesn't always sound as good as Noah's playing it. So he's going to demonstrate what it sounds like when it's not so good. So right at the beginning, it really did not sound that pleasing to my ears, at least. But the second half did. So up here, I've got this little graph, and it's just a mathematical way of saying that in certain areas, it sounds good. In certain areas, it does not sound good, and it just depends on how much force you're applying to the string, how fast you're playing, and it's just a fancy way of saying what Noah just demonstrated for us. And that's all that we have to present. So we're going to get to the beautiful part of the demonstration with Noah's piece of music.
Thank you everyone for coming out tonight, and great job to all of you for explaining the physics behind how these instruments work. It's really interesting, and it's something that we as musicians always get to learn about ourselves, so it's fun to hear about it. So I just have a short little piece to play for you guys. It's a very obscure cello piece. It's the first two movements of the Shrepton Solo Suite. If you haven't heard of it, that's okay. I'd be concerned if you had heard of it, to be frank. But it's a piece I really enjoy, and it demonstrates a lot of the physics principles that they were talking about, such as bowing in the rich areas of the string, those lower positions near the bridge, and harmonics and other techniques like that. So it's a fun one to mess with.
Hello. Hello. Hi there, I'm Clyde. I'll be playing on the viola today, which is deeper and lower than the violin. So the violin strings go G, D, A, E, but the violas go C, G, D, A. So it's a little bit lower, a little bit darker, a little heavier, a little meatier. The viola normally, in terms of the entire orchestra, kind of plays a accompanying role normally. It has some melody, but it's a lot of a deeper sound, but it can still play solo music. I'll be playing a Irish folk song today by Liz Carroll. It's called Lament of First Generation. Thank you.
All right, next we're going to be talking about woodwind instruments. And so for that, that includes Today we have a bassoon, a clarinet, and a flute. And here they come on stage right now. Give them a round of applause. So fun fact, the reason why they're all grouped together as woodwinds is because they all used to be made out of wood, but then we had brass instruments and woodwind instruments was the two classifications, but then a saxophone is considered a woodwind instrument because it's not brass, even though it was never made out of wood. I don't know. So the woodwinds are grouped into two key groups. We have air jets and reeds. And so for our first one that we want to talk about is an air jet, and that is our flute. So an air jet is a tube, it usually has holes in it so you can play different notes. And when you blow at a right angle, it splits your air and vibrates the jet. And that's what makes the sound out of it. We can have our next slide now. Oh my bad, I'm sorry. And then next, we have the reeds. Reeds are usually made out of a cane. It's a very thin material. And again, it's like the splitting the air, but this time the reed vibrates. Usually it's against a solid object, or sometimes you have two reeds together. And so, how this all works, we'd love to demonstrate. You can really make a reed out of anything around you, even a single blade of grass. A grass is a single reed instrument. It will vibrate against the solid parts of your thumb, and if you blow it just right, it'll sound like so. Takes a second. And if you want to make a double reed instrument for yourself, you can look closely on the slide there. You can cut holes in it to change the notes of it. It just cut in slips. And here we have a demonstration of what that would sound like. And so that's the fundamentals of how reeds work. And with that, the reed will excite the whole body of an instrument, and we can make so many different kinds of instruments. We have these with us. I mentioned the saxophone, but we also have an oboe. Bagpipes are a reed instrument. That's a fun fact. And just so many different kinds. But today we're going to be focusing on these three instruments, and the core five are the saxophone, oboe, bassoon, the flute, and the clarinet. And so to demonstrate what these instruments sound like, we'd love to just hear a concert C major scale, first from our clarinet. And then from our bassoon. And from our flute. Perfect. And so you'll notice that even though they all play the same notes, they all have a different quality to them. We call this distinction of how each instrument plays notes timbre. And we'll have Bonnie talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so timbre basically put is what makes a flute not sound like a clarinet and sound like a flute. Specifically, it's the quality of a sound, and it is really just caused by the different frequencies and their relative volumes in that sound. So you can see here we have four spectrum analyzers of four instruments playing the same note. We have the clarinet, and you can see here that even though they're all playing the same note, they have different overtones at different volumes from each other. So clarinets have predominantly odd harmonics. Flutes have a few upper harmonics, and then oboes have harmonics that have a higher amplitude than the fundamental pitch. And there's a couple of different things that affect timbre. there is the shape of the instrument, which is the most obvious one, because obviously none of these instruments look like each other. There's also the shape of the player's vocal tract. So in the similar way that we can make different sounds with our mouths by speaking to make words, you can also adjust how air goes through your throat into the instrument. Tongue position is also an important thing. It changes the flow of the air into the instrument. And also the quality of the reed can affect it. And Heidi will actually be showing us how she can go about changing the quality of the reed to change the timbre.
First, a little bit about the reed used. The material used to make reeds in Western art music instruments is called Arundodonax. It's a type of grass similar to bamboo, and the different instruments use different parts of the stalk. For example, oboe uses the top bit of the stalk because it has the smallest diameter, and then the bigger the reed gets, the further down the stalk is used. Over here, I brought some cane to show. This is for oboe reeds. All reed players adjust their reeds in some ways to different extent. Oboist, granted I'm biased, as an oboist I feel we do the most work to do them because we start from this. But clarinetists and bassonists as well, clarinetists use sandpaper and or paper because it's much finer and makes much smaller adjustments. So here's a reed that I've brought that is not one I would play on. Because there's a tool that we use, an aural tool that we use called crowing, where we place the reed in our mouth and slide it into the string. And that tells us how the reed is vibrating. So here it's kind of a wonky sound. I would never, if I were to play on this, it would be a very free, something you wouldn't be in tune with other instruments with. Which is not a good thing when you're trying to play with other people. So, razor blade, I'm going to shorten the tip. I took quite a bit off accidentally, so hopefully it'll still work. It will. Do you hear how it's a much more refined sound? Just by taking that little bit off. And so that's what reed players do to just play every day. But as Bonnie was saying, a reed affects the timbre of the instrument, but we can see how that changes when we looked at how instruments are playing through the spectrum analyzer.
Just to give a brief refresher on how to read a spectrum analyzer, that x-axis up there is the frequency in hertz, and the y-axis is the volume or amplitude in decibels. And I'm going to ask our flautist and our clarinetist to come over for a demonstration. As we have them play, look for evenly spaced peaks, which are the partials, the harmonic partials that we're looking for. And now our clarinet. What we can glean from the spectrum analyzer of their performances is that flutes have all harmonic partials, whereas clarinets only have odd harmonic partials, leading to more spaced out peaks and frequencies. And we'll now hear a piece from our woodwind ensemble.
right, hello everyone. We are the percussion group, and we are going to be talking about the percussion family. It is a huge family of instruments made up of 4 main classes. There's membranes, plates, bars, and bells. We're going to have a membrane snare drum and a couple of cymbal plates, along with some bar instruments over there that we're going to be demonstrating with later on. A couple of properties that are pretty analogous across the whole board are the fact that percussion instruments are free damped oscillators, which basically means that you have to strike them either with a mallet, a stick, or a hand, and then they will decay out on their own over time. Even though they decay pretty quickly, you can simulate a sustain by doing a sort of roll. We'll also be demonstrating that later on. Looking more closely at the bar instruments, we're going to be looking at the marimba and the vibraphone. They both have pipes on the bottom that help the sound resonate out after you hit it. But the main differences are the marimba is made of wood, while the vibraphone has metal. And so what that leads to is in the upper harmonics of the marimba, they're all pretty inharmonically related. Whereas in the vibraphone, they're more harmonically related, and there's also more of them going up higher. And another property of the bar instruments is this process called undercutting, where rather than just having a solid plank of wood, they undercut it in order to increase the tension and help bring out the fundamental along with the first few overtones. And so let's hear the difference. Let's hear a middle C off of the marimba, and then a middle C off of the vibraphone. Can you hear how that one rings out a lot longer?
All right, so we have one more harmonic instrument to demonstrate, and we're going to talk about tension and how that affects drum membranes. So we already had a great demonstration of tension from our string group, so we thank them for doing the hard work for us. But you can kind of see here, this is similar to what they demonstrated with a single string. You can kind of think of this as a single dimension oscillator, whereas when we go to a drum head or a membrane, it's expanded into a second dimension. So we actually have this 2D plane that can have its own modal resonances as you strike it. And we're going to demonstrate how the tension can increase the pitch of a drum head. A really useful instrument for showing that is the timpani. So our percussionist is going to show you a pitch slide on a timpani using the foot pedal, which can increase the tension as he wants to. So that's pretty cool. Next, we're going to also show how some membranes can be used in our inharmonic percussion instruments. So we've demonstrated harmonic percussion instruments, they have a very melodic sound, but our inharmonic percussion instruments are more something like you find on a drum kit, where you have a loud impulse and not a lot of related overtones after that. It's going to be a lot more chaotic waveforms and things that produce a lot of noise. So if you've never seen a snare drum before, flipped over on its end, it actually looks like this. So this is what's called the snare. And it's usually metal wires or sometimes plastic wires stretched across the bottom of the bottom head on the snare. And when those interact with the bottom resonant head, all 3 of the head, or the 2 heads and the 3rd set of wires are all going to interact in a complex way to give you something that looks kind of like this. So we can see here, we do have a fundamental pitch, but a lot of what you're hearing is also classified as noise or just random chaotic frequencies in the higher frequency spectrum. So we're going to have Zach demonstrate what the snare drum sounds like with the snares switched off. So right there, you're just hearing the fundamental pitch of the 2 bottom heads, something down here in the lower register, and then when he turns the snares on, you're going to hear all of the higher frequencies. So it sounds pretty much like a snare drum, but he's also going to simulate a sustain by performing a drum roll. You will, or drum roll please, and so that's how you do it on a snare drum. So you can also do that on cymbals and marimbas and any other percussion instrument to simulate a roll. Next, we're going to let Isaac talk about cymbals, and as you notice here, cymbals don't have a ton of fundamental frequency, but they do have a lot of chaotic higher frequencies, which tends to lend to their brightness and how harsh they can sound.
All right, yeah, so cymbals, like you said. There are a lot of those higher frequencies and overtones that make up the sound of a cymbal, and the sound of a cymbal, there's all different kinds of cymbals that, what determines the sound of the cymbal is the shape of the cymbal. So for example, right here we have more of a curved bell cymbal, and over here is what's referred to as a China cymbal, where you can see on the edges they are curved up. Another thing that contributes to the sound is the density of the cymbal. So higher density and heavier cymbals will have higher frequencies that you'll be able to hear, and a thinner cymbal will be lower. And Zach, if you would demonstrate, please. Trusty sidekick Zach here will demonstrate. And now on this one. Another thing that is similar that he did on the snare drum is a roll. You can also do that on a cymbal, and when he hits it, you'll hear the lower frequencies, but as he puts more intensity into it, it will bring out those higher frequencies. And like we said before, percussion instruments are usually damped or struck. They're not driven, but in the cases of cymbals, you can use like a violin bow to sort of drive and excite those frequencies, so I'll demonstrate that. Yes, that's the cymbals. We'll do the clogging plates now. Oh, we have a slow motion snare drum, so you can see what we're talking about, the vibrations of the membrane. Now we'll do the clogging plates.
Cool. So, kind of related to percussion instruments is a phenomenon called the Chladni plates. So a man named Eric Chladni invented this. He found out that every instrument that vibrates, and even just a plate that vibrates, if you pour sand on it, then the sand will move to a certain spot on the plate where the plate isn't actually vibrating. And this is where what we call the node. And so you can get Chladni plates in different shapes and sizes. And this one is in the shape of a violin. So if you poured sand in your violin, which you shouldn't do, by the way, it would make a certain design on the body of the violin, which is pretty cool. But we're going to demonstrate the square plate today, which is right here with this Chladni plate. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour sand on the top of this. And as we switch it on, we're going to choose, we have 3 different frequencies that this machine is going to vibrate the plate at. Originally, Eric Chladni had to use a violin bow against the plate in order to get it to vibrate hundreds of years ago. But luckily, we have a machine that will do this for us. And so this is at 450 hertz, which is close to the concert A that the instruments played up here earlier. And if you can see, it makes a certain design on the plate, which is really cool. And this happens on every instrument. And this, if we had a square instrument, that is the type of design that would happen there. And so the next one we're going to do is at 920 hertz. And it's going to make a slightly different design. Pretty cool, huh? Looks like a flower. And remember that this plate is actually vibrating 900 20 times a second in order to make this happen, which is really cool. Even though you can't really see it, that's what's happening. And then the final frequency we're going to show you is at 1600 hertz. So 1600 times a second, it's moving up and down. And so you can see the sound moves to create an even more crazy design. And the designs tend to get more complex as you change the frequencies. Cool, and that is it for our presentation. So now we're going to turn the time over to our percussion instruments.
All right, we're going to have them introduce themselves and talk about their piece.
Hey, thanks for that explanation. Appreciate it. This is Steven, my name's Ashton, and that's Luke. We're part of the UVU Percussion Ensemble, and we'll be playing a piece I've written entitled Boundless. It has two movements. The first movement is titled Infinity, and the second is Time. I played a lot with the concept of constant time and time that's changing, and just our relationship with time. You'll also notice a lot of dissonances that was talked about earlier. So, thank you. Hope you enjoy it.
Thank you again to our amazing percussion ensemble and all of the instrumentalist ensembles who have come today and brought such cool and amazing varied music. So I am one of the students who is a part of the brass group, which will be featured next. But before we feature them, I'm going to do a little vocal demonstration, because we don't get to use any vocal performance today. But as we will talk about later in our presentation, helium is much lighter than the normal air that we breathe, which is composed of oxygen and nitrogen and a bunch of things like that. So when you inhale helium, it sounds at a much higher frequency. So just for fun and to hear, I'm going to sing a very short line of Italian opera, and then I'm going to sing it again, but with my lungs filled with helium. Thank you. And then we'll be pleased to bring our brass group to the stage, and we hope you enjoy our presentation. Awesome. So today, with the help of our amazing brass ensemble that decided to show up and make this presentation so much cooler, we're going to talk about a few different elements of brass instruments and what makes them special in particular. Brass instruments fall into this category called lip reed, and lip reed is basically, it's mostly brass with very few exceptions, but what it means is that your lips are vibrating, and that's what creates, the air that comes out of that is what creates the vibration, and that's how they work. So the excitation source is the blown air, similarly to air jet instruments, or most of the instruments here, or all of the instruments here, start with blown air, and then as it moves out of your lips, the lips vibrate, and then that's what creates that waveform. So that's the oscillator, and then the resonator will be the instrument of the body of the instrument, which creates its sound and its pitch. And then what radiates it out and amplifies it to an audience is going to be the bell of the instrument. Obviously, all the different instruments have different sizes and different ways of regulating their resonator, but that's the basics of it.
So I'm going to be talking about a few of the things we're going to introduce in more detail to you guys later on in the presentation. So these are essentially just the main unique aspects of brass instruments, the things that make them essentially their own family. So the first one Cale talked about earlier, it's the use of lip reed. And while it's not only brass instruments, there are a few exceptions. One fun one is the didgeridoo. It's mostly brass instruments that use this lip reed motion. Another interesting part, and something they use very frequently, is the lengthening and shortening of that tube, that resonator that basically the sound is generated in. They can lengthen and shorten it to compensate for changes in air temperature that will affect their sound. We'll go into these things a lot deeper as we go further in the presentation. Another one we're going to show you guys is something that is unique to instruments like the bugle. They can use it without their valves and without their instruments, but it's best explained in the bugle. It's an instrument that has no valves and no way to change the length of the tube or anything like that, and they're able to change the note with just their mouth. And so they can do that with the mouthpiece and things like that. And we'll go into all these things further later in the presentation. Okay, so like we mentioned earlier, each of these instruments uses what's called a lip reed, which isn't actually a physical piece of hardware.
it's the lips on all of the players. And you can each do this right now if you want to. You can demonstrate the lip read by just letting your lips lightly touch and then blowing air out like this. So now you can go home with your free lip read. It's very influenced by what Dr. Anderson mentioned earlier in the presentation. Bernoulli's principle has to do with high and low airspeed causing the lips to open and close. It creates pulses of pressurized air that you can see here with compression and rarefactions that create the vibration. So just think of each of those as a wave of air going really fast through the instrument. Oh yeah, sorry. We do have a video for this. It's kind of a little gross at the slow motion parts, so you'll see what I'm talking about in just a moment.
It looks like a fish.
Yeah, so that's happening behind each of those instruments when they make music. And yeah, I think we're good on that.
For this, brass instruments are equipped with tuning slides. And tuning slides are really cool because they allow musicians to change the length of the instrument effectively. Which allows musicians to compensate for temperature-related pitch variations, and by pushing or pulling these slides, we can maintain the desired pitch, which is pretty cool.
Okay, so before we get started, consider the following. So us humans, we breathe air. In the world, there's a bunch of airs, different types of gases. For today's demonstration, we will be showing you what it's like to use oxygen to blow air through the trumpet, as well as helium. The two differences is the airspeed, where air has an airspeed of 343 meters per second, whereas helium has it at 973 meters per second. So whenever you change the type of gas or the air molecules that are in the air, the airspeed will change, and we will show you that with the trumpet right now. But before we get started, I will show you guys what a mouthpiece is. So it's a small, brassy, metal little cone, and through it you can play your notes, you can play different things to change. Similar to the bugle, this is what it would sound like. Well, a little better from these guys. But that's kind of what it sounds like. And, if I get my trumpet. So this is what a horn sounds like with regular air. And now this is what a trumpet sounds like when you throw helium into the mix. So, that was me not changing anything. But that was all the helium making the change. Sorry, I don't know if you heard that, but that wasn't me making the change. That was all of the helium getting into my trumpet and making those pitches sound different as well. Just one last thing before we finish off. There are just some things. The trumpets and French horns, tubas, baritones, they all have valves. Each valve has a different function. The first valve here, it lowers the tone, or lowers your pitch by one tone. So if I was to play a note, just one tone. If you play the second valve, it usually lowers your note by a semitone, or better known as a half tone. Something like that. And if you use the third valve, it'll lower it by a tone and a half, or a whole step and a half, or whatever you want to call it, 3 half steps. lastly, for our demonstration, we will show you guys what it's like when you play a freshly tuned instrument, nice and warm, versus a cold one. Trumpets, if you would like to play a concert, B flat for us, please. Thank you. And now, to the normal ear, you wouldn't really hear much dissonance or a clash between the notes. But when you play with a note that is out of tune, this is what it will sound like after I elongate my tubes and make this long. So because my trumpet was cold, I had to compensate using my lips, or what I could have done is just made my tubes that much shorter to compensate. But that's just a demonstration of what happens when you play with a warm versus a cold trumpet.
All right. And that's the end of our presentation. So now we're going to have the brass ensemble play us some music. And thank you guys so much for coming out tonight.
Up here, all of our student performers tonight. I want to give them a big thank you for helping us